Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth episode of the Vladcast, the podcast by Vlad's Parastoria that comes out at really irregular intervals. In these chats, we explore topics that don't necessarily fit into separate videos on the channel or even on the second channel. If you're here listening, you probably know Vlad's Parastoria exists. Sometimes I post serious things there, but mainly things that are a bit less serious. First of all, this is the first video I'm making after reaching 100,000 subscribers. I've achieved this milestone. YouTube is still verifying this. It takes them about 10 days, then I'll be able to request the famous silver button. I still don't know if I should proudly keep it in my recording room or just shoot it directly. That would make a really nice video, maybe outside. Actually, I haven't really planned anything for these milestones, but maybe we'll do a live stream in the future, maybe with guests or with my closest collaborators, to celebrate this thing. At this moment, I haven't thanked you yet, so first of all, thank you to everyone who follows and supports me. Maybe later on we'll celebrate this a bit better. I feel the pressure to do something very specific, unlike in past years when I had far fewer subscribers. 100,000 seemed like a pretty distant and unreachable goal, and I said that if I ever reached 100,000 subscribers, I would buy a Pallas SA 1522 and convert it to a bullpup. Now, this joke that the most dedicated fans of the channel know, maybe not all of you know what I'm referring to, I'm talking specifically about one of my old videos, which is actually titled Pallas SA 1522. I'll explain the worst weapons I've ever seen in my life. At the time, I was still working at the shooting range in Poland, and we bought a pretty large batch of these little rifles. They were similar to the AR-15, and they were supposed to be pretty cheap for those who wanted to shoot a .22 with something that looked like an AR-15. The horror we found when these little rifles arrived exceeded all expectations. Apart from the fact that out of the 25 or 30 that arrived, I remember, half of them were unusable. They had a ton of problems. And I spent several months both trying to fix the ones that weren't sold to try to get something out of them, and fixing the ones that were sold, which inevitably came back to us because they were broken. There were a lot of problems both with the materials and with quality control. They had a lot of issues. Parts would come off, threads that were made of papier-mâché. There were a lot of problems with the trigger mechanism. One of these Pallas came back to us with what apparently was a binary trigger, meaning it would fire even when you released the trigger. So with one press, the trigger would fire 2 shots. Another one that would just fire everything in full auto. You understand that this is quite a serious problem for sporting firearms that are supposed to be semi-automatic, but these were just a few of the many problems. The weapon was built pretty badly. It was assembled with lots of small parts held together by lots of little screws. The bad thing is that to open it completely, if I remember correctly, you needed 6 different tools. There were so many different types of screws, including 2 different torques. I had to buy the torques. It was a mess. It was a nightmare even just to remove the bolt. Removing the bolt in that weapon was so difficult that the manual clearly said not to do it. Don't clean it. The moment a gun's manual tells you not to clean it, you don't expect a particularly long life from that weapon. Anyway, this Pallas SA-22 has become kind of a signature meme on the channel. I really like that video, and the older fans, especially during the live streams, still laugh about this. Regularly, for example, I also get messages on Instagram where people mention this story about the famous Pallas SA 1522. And the funny thing is that back then I said if I reached 100,000 subscribers, I would buy it and turn it into a bullpup. Now I almost feel obligated to do it, and I'll tell you something strange. I almost wouldn't mind because it would be a pretty nice project. I've already thought about how to do it because I already have a friend who runs a gun shop and has a license to manufacture these things. So, doing something like this would be strictly illegal, but we want to be covered legally, so officially it would still be done by a weapons manufacturer. I still need to review the legal aspects, but it's possible I could do this crazy thing in the future. Keep in mind that right now these Pallas, the few that are still around, the few that still have the dignity to be in circulation, go for about 400 or 500 euros. Many will also remember my channel. I commented on the review that Army Magazine did of this Pallas, saying, "It never jams. You can really tell that's just nonsense. German quality probably just meant it was barely assembled in Germany because it absolutely had nothing to do with quality. Really sad. I mean, go watch the video if you haven't seen it. A really old video done really badly, but you can clearly see my immense frustration from having to work with these rifles for so long. I reached extreme moments where from 2 broken rifles I made one working one because there really was no other choice. There are a lot of not so stupid things in that weapon. And go check it out. Maybe later on we'll be able to do a nice project to make one. Bullpup. Obviously the bullpup is another big meme of the channel. I'm not particularly fond of that kind of firearm ergonomics for many different reasons. We've talked about this extensively as well. What I wanted to talk about instead regarding my 100,000 subscribers is that 2 thoughts came to mind. The first thought, which is a bit trivial, is about success on YouTube. No, because in the end, after many years of work and almost 700 videos, here we are with 100,000 subscribers. But there are so many people who try and don't succeed. I want to tell you my formula for success, what I think I did right and what I did wrong. And the choices I've made also because certain changes or directions the channel has taken or not taken have often been very deliberate decisions. First of all, for anyone who wants to start the adventure of becoming an influencer on any topic on YouTube, the question often arises whether quality or quantity is more important. The truth is that both are important. I found that, for example, many people try to almost waste their energy trying to brand themselves. Branding is important. What do I mean by that? When you create a channel, you need to be recognizable. You need to have a recognizable logo. You need to have a recognizable name. You need to have a catchphrase. I shoot stuff, right? In my case, you need to have a type of content that the user recognizes and expects. That's what branding is. However, many people think about branding themselves first and then about making content. You might open a channel, introduce yourself, everything looks great, and then you don't publish or you publish rarely. It's much more important to go ahead and publish. Publishing regularly is the single most important thing, in my opinion, when trying to build a brand, a successful channel. You have to do it. You can't waste time talking about yourself like, oh, I'd like to do this project. Just do it. I see so many small YouTubers in the firearms field, but not only there, who spend their time trying to brand themselves. This is something I've discussed at length with my dear friend Arnaldo Paglia, also known as Barbaroffa. Arnaldo, who also works with social media professionally. He's given me a lot of advice in the past. However, for example, even he has made mistakes in the past. And we've discussed this. Also because he has, and I helped him along with others to better understand what he himself wants for his own channel. In my opinion, and I've told him this quite openly, good old Arnaldo sometimes wastes time trying to brand or rebrand himself. And I told him, Arnaldo, you need to make videos. You need to publish. You should publish at least once a week, and then think about how to present yourself. You have to publish, which means saying you'll do it, making 3 videos, then stopping. Then, well, there were also personal situations. Now he's also a dad, so congratulations for that. I completely understand not having time, but this is just a small example to give you my first piece of advice. You need to publish. Paradoxically, it makes more sense. Instead, the format of a person, without mentioning names, who is making a ton of really poorly made videos, pretty funny if they weren't worryingly so. They're way off on some ideas about self-defense, in my opinion. But he's making them. That's the first very important thing. Do. Absolutely do. Absolutely do. Make videos first, then build your brand. But they also have to be decent videos because quantity alone isn't enough. Quantity. You can make 600 videos and you'll create a tiny niche of about 1,000 subscribers. However, to break out of the niche, you need quality, not just technical quality in content creation like cameras and audio. I've always had a really hard time with technical quality. My videos, despite I think some improvements over the years, have always been pretty rough when it comes to framing and audio, which, let's be honest, is more important than the video itself. I've learned that good audio is more important for a video than good visuals without good audio. It's much more important, especially for a format like mine. I always try to improve this aspect, but I've always found it a huge challenge. What I mean by quality is above all the quality of the content, because that's what wins. And there I think I've really nailed the formula. Despite the mistakes I can make, because of course I'm not infallible, I think I can say that I do as much research for my videos as I can. I'll give you an example. In October, I even recorded the live fire test of a disassembly of a Gewehr 88. The video still hasn't come out because, as I've often been doing lately to optimize the production process a bit better, I don't tell the story of the shooting range. Precisely so, I can review the information and make the video as complete and accurate as possible. Doing it at the shooting range, while also having to film other weapons, is often difficult. Well, this story about the Gewehr 88 that I want to tell you has one small unresolved question. I started looking into this question. I discovered that there is a book that is part of a trilogy. Actually, it's extremely expensive because one of the 3 volumes of the work costs 100 euros or more. For the whole work, we're looking at around 350 euros. That's not a small amount for a book, and I need to get my hands on it. I'm on vacation now, but when I returned to Legnano, where I currently live, I found out that there's a bookstore in Milan specializing in this kind of military collectibles that I'll go buy it. I'll invest this money because quality is important, because I know the audience expects this from me. A book that will definitely do me a lot of good, that will help me uncover a lot of information, as always happens when I get my hands on this kind of book. So it's also an investment that, from a financial point of view, I hope will pay off for me. How much do I spend on the channel? How much do I earn from it? That's a whole different story. You should know that you earn very little talking about guns. I try to keep the costs of going to the range, shooting, and research down, but there's really not much left over. So that's what quality is. If you ever wanted to talk about a topic like, I don't know, lawnmowers, what makes you an expert on lawnmowers? What kind of research can you do about it? Remember that a true expert, a master of a craft, is not someone who knows everything, but someone who knows where to find the information. I don't remember by heart the history, technical features, and everything else about every firearm, but I know where to look. When I know where to look, often by analogy, often by reasoning, I can get a lot of information, and knowing where to look to confirm them often works miracles. Because often you find information that is absolutely counterintuitive. You see this a lot in old weapons. This is something special. Old weapons are never random. The modern ones seem a bit more random, quote unquote, but when in the late 1800s it was necessary to produce, with the technology of the time, a series of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of military rifles. I assure you that every single cut in the steel and wood of that weapon serves a purpose and is there for a reason. Nothing is done at random, because when I have to do 50 operations by machine, I have to use 50 different machines and 50 operations that complicate my life, the cost, and many other things. So, I assure you that any cut, operation, or structural element that sometimes seems randomly placed actually has a very specific purpose. Someone thought of it for a reason, and that reason can be discovered. Maybe it might not be so obvious, and often this reason can seem counterintuitive. These things happen. For example, we saw one of these topics when I made my video where I wondered why the safety on the Garand has a hole. The truth is that I don't know. The truth is that even now we still don't know. But it's to tell you that that hole isn't there by chance because someone took the trouble during the manufacturing process to put a hole in that spot. No one does it for looks. The theory, if you haven't seen the video, is that probably one of the holes that's needed when there are metal sheets from which many small pieces are made, that hole along with others is used, for example, to align the sheet metal. There are production processes that have reasons for certain shapes and not others. There are many reasons, but anyway, just to tell you how I try to approach information. So in my opinion, this is also the formula for success that I recommend to you. Because I have this impression that in a certain sense, when I started making videos on YouTube on firearms, I repeat, maybe I'm wrong here, but it's just my impression, there weren't many people making them in Italian. There were definitely some channels. It might be a bit egocentric, but the impression is that many people started or tried to make videos partly because I was already doing it. I repeat, maybe it's just my wrong perception, maybe I'm being arrogant, so I hope the audience doesn't hold it against me. That's the impression I have. And even if some people present themselves in a really nice way and try to talk about these things, sometimes they don't realize they don't have that extra edge. Sorry for the lack of modesty. You need to have that extra edge. And you can find it because it's not like I invented that niche. You can find it. It definitely helps to be quite unique. Bringing unique and different content. I definitely had good success because I found my own niche. I found a format. Because if you go and watch my very old videos, they were quite different. There are some things that today, looking back, I would have put on Vlad non Spara. Where in fact, besides silly content, we could say there is also some pretty serious content. I would have put them there in hindsight, because at that time I was still looking for my format. Finding your own niche is absolutely essential. Speaking of niche and success on YouTube, the second thought. This is the second reflection. After almost 20 minutes, we finally get to it. I don't know if you remember that in the past, I collaborated in the creation of a TV show called Spari eSport. For Spari eSport, I made a series of short technical videos that illustrated some technical aspects, but I also took part in one of the episodes in the studio. Now, recently in October in particular, Spari eSport published an announcement. I'll read you part of this announcement. Spari eSport will not air this fall, 2024. This is due to a series of commercial and managerial reasons that have prevented production from reaching the quality and distribution levels achieved in the last seasons. We are sorry for those who follow us, but producing this TV show about sport shooting requires a lot of resources, both human and financial, and sometimes the right conditions just aren't there to make it happen. Spari eSport has always relied on advertising revenue. No TV station, organization, or federation has ever paid to produce the show and broadcast it. TV stations have always charged money to broadcast it. Do they do the same with other shows? It's a uniquely Italian distortion. Also because our show deals with topics that are still unwelcome on mainstream channels, shooting with firearms. Here, just to add my own comment, it's true, obviously for the general public, shooting with firearms is a completely taboo subject. Continuing. Unfortunately, our mission has always been exactly that, to show sport shooting where it's never shown on TV to the general public all over Italy and in the evening. To promote it and dispel all the harmful myths about shooting and those who practice it, which are so unfairly widespread in Italy, a country of champions instead. One very important thing to understand about this story, my relationship with this story, is that I did not part ways with this program on good terms. That's also why I didn't take part in the 4th season. I'll try to tell you as much as possible from my point of view how things went with this person, the producer Alberto of this Spari eSport. He contacted me one day, like many people actually do, through social media. He wrote me an email in particular, as far as I remember, complimenting me on the educational work I do, saying that he hosts this program and he would like me to make some content for him. I went and found a very friendly, easygoing person. He told me that he had worked for many years in the television industry and that he knew how to produce these things. Now, I'll tell you something in advance. You can find the first season of Spari eSport on YouTube, because according to the agreements he made with the TV station, they basically hold the rights to the show and they put it on YouTube. So you can go and watch it. It's produced just like any other television program would be, as it should be, since it's a TV show. Let me remind you right away that I didn't like it because sometimes he had a bit of a patronizing tone toward me. I mean, sure, I'm young, but I'm not exactly new to this world either. If you're writing to me because I'm being successful in spreading information about firearms, there's a reason for that. Well, it's fine to try to give advice. I actually don't mind technical advice. However, and this is where I'm going with this, what bothered me was a certain attitude related to the marketing of this thing. Because in the end, being successful in any field from a media perspective is really a matter of marketing, right? The influencer in the end is basically selling himself in a certain sense. He didn't promise me any money, also because he told me there wasn't any in this field, but I've never really cared much about money, as you all know well. If I were here for the money, I wouldn't be here. Let's be very clear about that. However, I thought it's always a good showcase to introduce myself, to have a wider audience, to find another type of audience that I can then bring to the channel. By the way, the 6 clips I made are mine and they're also on the channel. You can easily find them on the channel. They're the clips where, with the camera pointed at a sheet of paper, I explain some small technical things. They last 2 or 3 minutes. In addition, I actually participated as a guest in the studio for one episode. Unfortunately, you can't find this one on the web. We'll get to the reason why. I did this collaboration while always keeping in touch by email and by phone when needed. Now, those who know me well, my friends, my closest collaborators, know how much I hate phone calls. I deeply detest phone calls. Phone calls are something I don't understand and could easily do without in life. The funny thing is that until recently, I mean not at the shooting range, aside from a few exceptions, I have always worked a lot with the phone. I can say this now because some time has passed. I worked for a big online hotel booking site and I spent a lot of time on the phone or in various work calls, something I deeply hate. I deeply hate it because I multitask a lot and I read very quickly. So for me, written communication is faster, more efficient. You can convey much more to me by writing, and I can convey much more to you by writing. And I can reach my goals much more quickly because often when talking on the phone, people talk about nonsense. Talking on the phone distracts me from what I might be doing. While I'm really multitasking on the computer, you can send me an email. I read it in 10 seconds because I have the power of speed reading. Maybe some of you have it too. In 10 seconds, literally in less than 10 seconds, I have all the necessary information and I can get back to work. I doubt that in a 10-second phone call you could have given me that information. This is my own quirk, let's call it, of hating phone calls. But anyway, speaking of phone calls, emails, which were very welcome when they arrived, allowed us to make this collaboration happen. Everything's fine. He contacted me after a few months to try to get organized for the 4th season. At that moment, I was already a little hesitant. I'll tell you, I was a little hesitant because I had done an analysis based also on when these episodes were airing. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, one of them was even watched live together during one of my streams. I don't remember which one, but I do remember that there was something like this, at least. I went to draw my conclusions. And I noticed that the impact these programs, these publications had on my channel wasn't 10, it wasn't 1, it was 0. I can't confirm this 100% because it's hard to say how many people at that moment saw my video and went to look for me on the web, but I'm pretty sure that 0 is the answer. And the only subscribers or money that I earned from this work of mine were those that came to me, thanks to the reposting of my segments on my YouTube channel. So I was already hesitant about this because for me at that moment it was turning into something I was doing for free, which, okay, but it didn't have any benefit for me in any way. Rather, if I had to make segments like that, explaining things, I would make them for myself the way I wanted, not the way he needed them, right? It's clear. This is clear. He invited me for dinner. I made an appointment. Something happened to me, I swear I don't remember what, and I asked him, can we reschedule this dinner? By the way, I think it was on the morning of the same day. It's a bit annoying, but unexpected things can happen. He was deeply offended. How dare you? I invite you to dinner and you don't come. I gave you this opportunity to do this. I felt pretty bad about it. He was deeply offended. I also felt pretty bad about it. I told him, look, I made myself available to you. I didn't gain anything from it, and you expect. I mean, we can talk on the phone, we can communicate by email, also because the vast majority of this work we did this way anyway, because we had only met him twice up to that point. The first time, in fact, was to meet him, and the second time was in the studio to record the episode. But all the other work I did, making these videos and sending them there, was all done remotely. I had suggested this alternative. Look, we can talk. He was deeply offended by his insistence that I be there in person, but in reality the work would have only taken 5 minutes. The rest would have been nonsense, a different story. I understand that he might feel bad, that I'm not coming to the dinner, that I ask you to have it another day, and if there are urgent work matters, we can get in touch another way, all right? This is my version of the story. And after this, I thought about it a lot. Actually, I was sorry because the premise of Sparisport was very interesting, very noble. I admit that I also picked up the idea a bit, meaning that from that moment on, I sometimes tried to present shooting sports. I don't know if you noticed. It's not a coincidence. Certainly, from this point of view, it inspired me. However, I thought a lot about why I had exactly 0 subscribers. And the mistakes, in my opinion, that Alberto made in managing Sparisport became obvious. Why did I get 0 subscribers? Because he made a show about the world of shooting that he would broadcast on small TV channels, the ones you find after I don't know how many channels, on over-the-air digital TV. If we go back and read the announcement about the suspension of the show, I'll read you a particular part again. To show shooting sports, referring to Sparisport, where it's never seen, on TV, to the general public all over Italy, and in the evening. Now, with all due respect for those who work and produce programs on local TV stations, but you, when was the last time you turned on Cafe TV 24? When was the last time you watched a program on Cusano TV? The fact that these are TV stations that broadcast nationally doesn't change the fact that they have an extremely low audience share. Let's be serious. Who actually watches this stuff? There are people who might be extremely attached to some personality, but for the most part, let's say, I don't want to bring up stereotypes like the old man channel surfing and ending up on these channels. The intention was definitely noble, and it was clear that he wanted to use small channels as a springboard to move on to bigger ones. However, I think that's a huge strategic mistake. It's true that there isn't non c'è la shooting sports on TV for the general public, to use his words from this statement, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily a bad thing. And if it's not a bad thing, at least it's not necessarily the right means of communication. We're in 2024 right now, and the show was already airing before COVID, at least the first season. Now, in the age of the web, seriously, how much impact can local TV really have on any phenomenon? Tell me, give me an example, in the comments, please, of something, some cultural phenomenon, some product, some idea that came out of local TV stations. At least in the last 20 years. The truth is that it's not a good medium. TV is increasingly becoming, as new generations use other systems more, like social media, for example. TV is losing more and more of its appeal, its power, even though it still has great power. However, TV is losing this dominance. Local TV is at the bottom of the list. When the quality of mainstream TV productions is even higher, local TV suffers. It suffers a lot. There used to be many local TV stations, more local TV stations in the past. Many of them have closed down for obvious reasons. When you find yourself producing a product like this, from what I understand, the people, the companies that used to sponsor it, as you can read between the lines, because there were companies that sponsored it, thanks to advertising revenue, they stopped doing it. And do you know why I think they stopped doing it? Because they also realized that the impact is exactly zero. Because when you advertise products for shooters, but you do it on local TV channels to old people who are channel surfing in the evening, exactly what kind of advertising return can you expect? Shooting is already a niche thing. It's still put in the biggest niche, or rather the smallest niche, on local TV. When I have someone who is able to buy a product from a company, let's say Beretta, I just threw that out there. I don't know if Beretta was sponsoring it, but when I'm able to buy a product, Beretta, it's not like I buy it just because I saw it. Advertising on Cafe TV 24, if I'm making myself clear. So I believe that here, Alberto, I don't even know. I'd like to say I tried to explain it to him, but I don't remember. He was deeply wrong. His target audience. Spare Sport was not renewed for a new season. He didn't renew it for a new season because the mentality behind it is deeply wrong. There's another proof of this mentality. Now, I do YouTube. My content is publicly available, except for a few things that are reserved for subscribers. Really, just a few things. I'm a big supporter of trying to present information and make access to information as free as possible. I don't want to hide information behind a paywall. Because I think that good work and information should be accessible to everyone. Then, the way to earn money will be through advertising, other types of income, subscriptions, t-shirts, things like that. This is a fairly specific philosophical choice that I have always made. Now this thing doesn't exist anymore, but if you went to the Spari eSport website in the episode archive, you could buy, for example, for the modest price of €4.95 access to watch the episode once. Alberto told me very openly the first time we met that he doesn't want these things on YouTube because then people take them and do things with them, and instead he wants to have his own. But people on the web taking them and doing things with them is a positive thing. It's a positive thing. Whether people discuss it positively or negatively, what matters is they talk about it. And I'd be curious to know, I'll probably never know how many people. At the modest price of €4.95, I see some episodes are even cheaper for no particular reason. €3.95, others even €2.95 anyway. We're talking about €3 to €5. Seriously, how many people have actually paid to watch these episodes? For goodness sake, they're well made. I took part in this thing. I watched them. They're actually nice too. They're professionally made. From a technical standpoint, he definitely knows what he's doing. The video is good, the audio is good, and they're entertaining with the right pacing. But if the distribution channel is a couple of shows on a local TV station, a very local one, and if I want to watch it again, I'm faced with a paywall. If I wanted to watch the entire 5th season, I would have to shell out €15. You can see how it can't really gain traction this way. I'm sorry that the program is suspended because the intention is definitely interesting and noble. As a sports director, as the first promoter of these things in Italy, I am absolutely in favor. Let people talk about it, let more programs and traditional media be created, and let them talk about this sport. If someone were to come on YouTube and talk about shooting sports and became much more successful than me, well, I wish them success. But I hope they get 1 million subscribers. So people talk about shooting sports because I love this sport. And honestly, I'm more interested in the sport than in success. If I really had to give up doing YouTube to make suppressors legal in Italy, I would do it right away. Absolutely. So I'm sorry that Spare Sport was suspended, but it was suspended because of a very serious strategic mistake. A very serious and, excuse me, very predictable strategic mistake. Now let's tackle a slightly different topic. The thing is, as some of you may know, I serve as the range officer at the TSN in Legnano. Since I do it almost every day, I see a lot of situations. You've already heard horror stories about what I sometimes see. I've talked about it in some live streams. However, I've had many observations regarding pistol shooting and how to improve shooting with a pistol. I also made a video about it. The video that was titled, I think, about jerking. Sorry, I can't remember the exact title right now. It's about jerking. The shots. And it was definitely a well-received video, but that's just the tip of the iceberg of a series of thoughts I've had about the world of shooting. I noticed this strange thing that so many shooters and even some shooting instructors are much more focused on the aiming aspect than, in my opinion, they should be. When you aim at the target and you aim well, but when you pull the trigger, the gun moves because of a flaw in your technique. You can aim as well as you want. I often repeat to my students, if you want to call them that aiming is only 5%. 95% is where your hand directs the shots. A lot of people blame the weapon, how the sights are set, or the ammunition. However, for me, these are, to use a modern term, just pointless overthinking. Once the weapon is properly zeroed, it all depends on you. The ammunition as it is goes straight. A certain type of ammunition compared to another type, at 25 meters if you're in a competition, if there's a type of ammo that hits 2 millimeters farther over and costs you the match, it makes a big difference. But to shoot at a piece of paper, defensively speaking, at 12 meters, it's not the sights that are misaligned. It's almost always exclusively the shooter's fault. It's down to how the shooter often unconsciously moves the gun at the moment of firing. I found snap caps extremely useful in my work, especially for diagnosing what's happening. Snap caps mixed in with live ammunition in the guns, so when someone pulls the trigger thinking they're going to shoot, but the gun just clicks and you see how the gun moves, it works wonders. They work absolute miracles. There are people who quickly grasp this concept and understand their mistake, while others are a bit slower to correct it. In correcting this mistake, the feeling with the weapon is extremely important, as is how the weapon sits in your grip. And I discovered that it's not the shooter who finds the weapon, but the weapon that finds the shooter, just like Harry Potter's wands, basically. It's true. Because a weapon fits better in one hand, and we all have very different hands, fingers that are longer or shorter, palms that are longer or shorter, wider or spaced differently, and so on. How a weapon fits in your hand makes a huge difference. It makes a big difference. Of course, you have to use the correct technique, and with the correct technique, it makes a difference. For example, those who have been following me for a long time know that at first I didn't really like Glock, but over time this feeling has changed a bit. Whereas today I appreciate them quite a bit, especially certain models. It also changed because I myself have changed as a shooter, and I've definitely improved my shooting technique, especially with handguns. So I feel a bit more comfortable with some grips compared to others. I had a shooter who, for example, had serious difficulties shooting with a Glock he bought on a colleague's advice. But then, when he switched to the classic Beretta 98, he did much better with it. No magic, it just fit well in his hand. And this makes a huge difference. And then I noticed something else, just to make a little more sense of what I'm about to tell you. The strength you have in your hands also makes a big difference. Some people tend to give smaller pistols to women because they have small hands. I've always thought that's a load of nonsense. A small hand still adapts to the grip. Of course, it can't be excessively large, but what really makes the difference is physical strength. It's how firmly you hold the weapon. Because you can slap the trigger like crazy, but even if you do, if you're holding it that firmly and properly, the weapon still doesn't move when you fire, so it's pretty irrelevant whether you jerk or how hard you pull the trigger. So a solid, correct, but also firm grip is needed, and for that you need a bit of physical strength. It makes all the difference because it manages not only the recoil but also the trigger pull. Because if I hold it steady, the gun fires, and even if I slap the trigger with my index finger, the shot will still go straight. And I realized that the single best thing someone can do to improve their shooting, even without owning a gun or going to the range, is to go to the gym. To build strength in the arms in particular, obviously. Working on your calves won't help you that much, at least not from the point of view of handgun shooting technique. But that's an observation that's really stupid, it's obvious. I'm curious to know if you've had this experience or if you want to improve your pistol shooting, if you've considered going to the gym. I'm absolutely convinced that if you do this, your shooting will improve drastically, especially with a handgun, because your ability to handle the weapon steadily will improve. And since, as I said before, the shots go where your hand sends them and where your eye goes. Una mano, they are stable shots, stabili. Speaking about the gym, lately my life has changed a lot. My life has changed a lot because I reflected a little on my life. This is to satisfy the people who say I don't talk about myself. If you've made it this far on the Vladcast, well, we're towards the end of the Vladcast, and if you've made it this far, are you really interested? I hope so. As for what I have to say, even as a person, I don't share much about myself, but I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Right now. I've thought a lot about myself, about my life, my strengths, my weaknesses, my good qualities, and my flaws. I briefly mentioned something that happened to me, talking about my experience with the fire at the shooting range, while everyone is very focused on the fire itself. Someone noticed that I also talked about trouble I had swallowing meat, how a few years ago I almost choked on a piece of meat. I'm alive and well, but thinking a lot about that episode, it really scared me. It was really the first time in my life. It was a bit of a trauma because I realized that I could have really died. And this really pushed me to make some changes in my life. I'm eating much better. I'm going to CrossFit 5 times a week, which I started in late September, early October. I started out going twice a week. And I liked it so much that I'm going 5 times a week. And I'm already noticing a lot of changes. Benefits in my life, but also in my shooting. To connect to the previous topic, I was really inspired by a phrase I heard. I don't remember who said it or why they said it. In short, life is suffering. In life, you have to suffer and you can't escape from this. But you can choose whether to suffer now by dieting, eating well, going to the gym, and suffering at the gym. Or you will suffer when you can't choose. When you are old, when you are obese, when you have health problems, at that point you won't be able to choose and it will be too late. I've really thought a lot about these things and about getting back to working out. Changing my lifestyle is hard and I suffer, but I think about the idea of suffering. I choose to suffer now so I won't suffer in 10, 20, 30, let's hope 40 or 50 years. Choosing to suffer now is my choice. I suffer on my own terms. I choose to eat well, to go to the gym. The funny thing is that I've actually gained weight through all of this. I asked at the gym and they told me that this is perfectly normal, but I already see a lot of changes in my body. I'm not a thin person, that's pretty obvious from my videos. However, those who know me well in particular have noticed a drastic change in my physique. I still have a bit of a beer belly, but barely, and my legs are slimmer. I stand up much straighter when I walk, when I move, and when I do these things, I no longer constantly run out of breath. I breathe much better, I think much better. Veronica, my partner, teases me that when I finish working out, I become stupid. And it's true, because all my blood goes to my muscles. There's none left for my brain to think with. But after I rest, it's something a lot of people probably know. That mental clarity you get after a workout. Surely there's a scientific explanation behind it, maybe some kind of hormonal balance or good oxygenation in the body after a workout, an accelerated metabolism. I don't know, there's definitely something behind it. I'm getting a lot of benefits from it. I'm also trying to improve my life mentally. Also because of this, for example, I've almost completely stopped playing video games. I haven't played a video game in a month and a half. I mean at least 5, 6, maybe 7 weeks. I actually removed them from my computer because I thought, what if one day, in 10, 20, 30, 40 years on my deathbed, but will I care at all that I played those video games? I'd rather use that time to maybe make some videos, maybe go on a trip, maybe read a book that teaches me something about a topic. Now, I bought a book. I'm reading 2 books. In particular, the first one about the history of the Byzantine Empire, which I felt I had a terrible gap in. And the second book. I'm not religious or a believer, but I'm rereading the Bible. I wanted to reread it because I've already done it, but I wanted to remind myself of a whole series of references in art, literature, and cinema. It's full of these quotes, it's full of these stories. Besides the fact that I have a great interest in the history of religions from an anthropological and scientific point of view, as a human and social process. Religion interests me a lot. From this point of view, I repeat, I'm not a believer, so in other ways it doesn't interest me. That's why I often make a lot of jokes, a lot of remarks about religion. It's a topic that has always interested me a lot. I've even studied it a bit, but that's another story. That's why I'm rereading the Bible. Very interesting, damn repetitive, boring at times. But I'm using this time that would otherwise be wasted on a couch or an armchair doing nothing to try to do something. I don't know whether to call it a quarter-life crisis or to call it something else or a eureka moment. But I'm proud of what I'm doing. I feel much better. So my advice, as one of the characters from the TV series Boris would say, which I quote all the time now, is sign up for a gym and lift weights. That's absolutely true, really true. And I also advise you not to be lazy, suffer, choose to suffer, because one day you won't have a choice. Thank you all for following this Vladcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll see each other again. Well, whenever it's time to share more stories and reflections. Thank you for listening. Thanks to everyone who subscribed, who helped me surpass the milestone of 100,000. As always, we'll see each other next time.